It's the Hoffman Show on the Team 980, always live on the free Odyssey app, streaming live on YouTube as well at youtube.com/@theteam980. And if you're watching there, you're getting a full dancing show from Anthony Haney, standing, full thing. I don't think the music is still on. Maybe it's on in his headphones still, and he's still going.
I have it in queue.
Oh, okay. So you're just having yourself literally your
I'm
own
partying
party
over here, Craig.
I love it. Chris Russell is on before us from 1 to 4 each and every day. During that 1 o'clock hour today, he was discussing the potential to trade Kendall Fuller when training camp comes around. At least that's how I understand it based off his tweet. But Chris, before we get to that, if your show starts streaming live on YouTube, will you make Matt Essig dance?
How about if I make myself dance?
I mean, at that point, you're not making yourself dance. You're just dancing.
Yeah, that's fair, but the object would be then to turn off the audience. See, we actually want to grow the audience,
right.
So probably better off to have Essig, who's an athlete, who's in shape, as opposed to a 50-year-old dude like me, who's woefully out of shape, dance on YouTube.
What sport does Essig play? I didn't know he was an athlete.
He was a college swimmer. Very, very Michael Phelpsian of him.
I need to talk to him because I'm doing a sprint triathlon a month from today, and swimming efficiently is something that I should get better at. Maybe
you should get down with him. Absolutely, no doubt.
Anthony, book Essig for the show next week. I'm getting free advice on you. That's because if I don't have a radio show for that, then what's the point? You know?
Yeah, or you could just call up Michael Phelps and ask him.
You're going to pass along his number first?
Sure. I'll text it to you right after this.
Okay, great. Excellent. Wonderful. All right. Chris Russell is with us. All right, let's get into this Kendall thing. Give me the synopsis of the take here. Because obviously Kendall's set to count a lot on the salary cap. They draft 2 DBs. I'm guessing that is kind of the starting point. But where did you take it from here, and where did you land?
So basically, in a nutshell, I laid out 5 different options, right? You know, you could keep Kendall Fuller all year long, play out the final year of his contract. You know, he's a fine player, got off to an awful start last year, got better as the season went along, a little bit long in the tooth, but still a serviceable player. Maybe a good player, depending on the week, depending on the stretch. He seems to go hot and cold in my eyes. I don't know if you agree with that or not. Yeah, but I said, you can keep him all year and let him play out his contract, and maybe you get some sort of compensatory pick, whatever. Or I said the other options are, now that you have drafted both Quan Martin and obviously, especially Emmanuel Forbes, I said the other options are, you can cut him June 1st, you can cut him post June 1st. And I broke down the salary cap implications, and my understanding, Craig, unless you have something wrong, is they're going to be stuck with a little over $3 million no matter what, and they could save a little over $8 million because his base salary is non-guaranteed. I said, and here's the option that I would strongly consider, assuming that Emmanuel Forbes is what you think. He's healthy. Benjamin St. Juste is healthy. Danny Johnson has a better August than he had last year, so on and so forth. I said, you could, if you wanted to, trade a guy like Kendall Fuller late in camp, late in the preseason, maybe midway through, maybe before the cut down to 53, what have you, however you decide to do it, to try and, clear out some of that $8+ million cap figure, to then reinvest it in maybe somebody that pops free after the cut down to 53 that maybe you like a little bit better. Maybe that's a little bit younger. Maybe that's a little bit more consistent, and that was the whole genesis of it. Now that you have Emmanuel Forbes and Quan Martin, and I'm sure many are going to disagree and just say, no, you can't do that, and I don't think they're going to do it, but that's kind of like what I would do.
So it's an interesting thought, and you've kind of, admittedly, Chris, you've done a thing that is smart intellectually, but annoying from a sports talk standpoint, which is you buttress yourself. You fortified your take with a pretty impenetrable logic, which is, if there's a better, cheaper player available, they should go with that guy. It's like, that sounds good. When you talk about the potential for them to pick up a guy who gets cut from another camp, right? If someone becomes available that they like. I think that the rush to cut Kendall is just that, to be honest with you. I think, and the more I've thought about this more actually post-draft, because I think it's a lot easier to be cold and just about the numbers, especially when you're dealing with a lot of that stuff during free agency. And then all of a sudden you look around and you realize, well, yeah, Forbes is super young. Obviously, Martin's super young. They just got drafted. They haven't even been to rookie minicamp yet. And then you've got Benjamin St-Juste, who has shown tremendous flashes, but zero consistency. His ability to stay on the field, and also, even if you just take his sample last year outside after they cut William Jackson, very good, very small in terms of that sample, where Kendall is a much more proven commodity and actually graded out pretty well last year. Like, he's mid-70s on PFF, which, again, is not the Bible, but is about as good as we have. And it just seems to me like the rush to, and again, like what you're doing is letting camp play out, and if it plays out that he's not one of your best guys, and, you know, even beyond the guys you said, a guy like Christian Holmes has a much better camp, and you feel like you can actually trust him, like, great. But I do feel like, Chris, there's this rush to move on from him, from Logan Thomas, from good players who have cuttable contracts for financial purposes when they don't actually need to do that financially.
And the only reason, let me be clear, the only reason why I really started making this argument in my mind, and I mentioned times earlier, and then I did, like you said, the entire first hour today on it, was because that number sticks out a little bit like a sore thumb at $11+ million, and 8.5 of it or so is cuttable, right, without any penalty. And on top of that, it's an expiring contract 1 year from now. And on top of that, you just drafted 2 corners. So, you know, I started putting that together in my mind. Well, okay, you're not going to move on from any of those other guys that we mentioned, but, you know, this team clearly is thinking ahead. Maybe it's purely for next year, and oh, by the way, it could be Kendall Fuller and Cameron Curl gone. We don't know. It could be it could be Danny Johnson and Kendall Fuller. One or both could be back. I guess I was just trying to think, maybe not outside the box, Hoff, but, you know, like, okay, what is the, you know, like everybody's been trying to figure out why they went back-to-back DBs in the first and second round. And I think logically you can explain it as, well, they're just looking out for depth down the line and depth now and replacements potentially down the line for Fuller and Cameron Curl. Yes, you can explain it like that, but I can also see a scenario where a team who reportedly, according to Over the Cap, has less than $3 million worth of cap room somehow, some way, might need some wiggle room at some point to, sign somebody in the second and third tier of free agency, or, again, especially after the roster cut down to 53, or as we approach that in late August. Now, again, a lot of things have to happen. I understand. I'm just kind of like shooting out a lot of theories here. I'm not saying that I know they're going to move on from Kendall Fuller. Again, I would strongly advise for them not to move on from Kendall Fuller by cut. But if you can find a way to trade him, maybe get a conditional, I don't know, third, fourth round pick back. Maybe you get a younger, better player or cheaper player that you like, and you can save some of that money. Why wouldn't you do that? Because I don't think Kendall Fuller is irreplaceable in my eyes.
Chris Russell with us, as if people didn't know, here on the Hoffman Show on the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app. So, like, I agree with you. They're going to have to create space some way. They currently don't even have enough space to sign their draft class. But, like, Chase Roulier, you cut Chase Roulier, restructure Roulier, or they could also extend Kendall and create money that way. Like, they've got options. That's not what I'm worried about. You bring up two interesting, like, philosophical things with that, though. First is the idea that they reward their own while also planning ahead, and it can cause, like, if kind of everything goes well, it can cause a little bit of redundancy. And the prime example of this is last year. They draft Phil Mathis in the second round with the idea that they're probably going to have to replace Daron Payne, and then Daron balls out, they pay him, and now it's like, well, I mean, depth is good, but do you really want your second round pick being used on a depth guy? No, you want a starter there. And you've got Allen and Payne locked in as the starters for a long time. Same could be true here. It's like, well, they're going to have to replace one or two, or three DBs. And what if they actually go out and play well? Like, what if you're stuck later in camp with, Kendall playing really well all spring and summer, St. Juste healthy and playing well all spring and summer, and obviously Forbes playing well as your first-round pick, who's definitely going to start unless he completely bombs out in the spring and summer. And that kind of leads to the other philosophical thing, Chris, which is NFL teams starting to do a little bit more of the NBA thing, where it's like, we got to think about expiring contracts as assets, right? And it's different though. And this is actually something I've talked about on the show a lot, and I'm very curious your reaction to this. So I will give like a mini version of my take here, and then let you respond. I actually don't think it's as critical for NFL teams to do that, right? In the NBA, when you don't use, like, for instance, Kyle Kuzma, if he walks, it's not like the Wizards get that cap space. They're over the cap. They're allowed to re-sign Kuzma because there's these things called bird rights that allow you to break certain rules, and without getting too deep into it, like, it's way more important to not lose assets for nothing in the NBA because that just doesn't become cap space. In the NFL, if a guy walks, you get a compensatory pick, and sure, maybe you could have gotten more the previous summer, but you got an extra season's worth of play out of the guy, hopefully good play, and then you actually get that cap space available because there are no special cap functions in the same way that there are in the NBA. So I guess what I'm ultimately saying is, if they just play out the year and Kendall walks, it's not the same kind of travesty as it would be for Kyle Kuzma walking for the Wizards this summer.
Oh, I would agree with all of that, and I think you laid it out perfectly. And again, I'm not sitting here saying, oh my God, there's no way you can justify having Kendall Fuller at $11+ million, because we know. Now, one of them happened in a meaningless game that they shouldn't have won anyway against the Cowboys, but we know that Kendall Fuller has the ability to make game-changing plays, and they talk about Emmanuel Forbes, ball-hawking tendencies. Well, Kendall's got a little bit of that, too. The pick six against Houston in a big spot that I think put him up 14-0. The big play at the end of the Atlanta game in the end zone, yes, off of a deflection by Deron Payne, saved the game. Of course, again, that pick six against Dak Prescott and the Cowboys. We know that he's got that ability, so I don't think that's the worst-case scenario. I guess my thing is I was trying to find, all right, now that they've made this investment, is there something else at work here, and what are their options? And again, going through the options, and one of them, I don't know if I mentioned it to you, is, maybe you ride into the season, and you see how St. Juste is holding up. You see how Danny Johnson is holding up, assuming he makes the roster, which he didn't last year. You see how Emmanuel Forbes is, and then you can possibly look at trading Kendall Fuller at the trade deadline. Now, you would have to absorb some of that $8.5-ish million base salary, of course, at that point, but you'd still save some money. So then there's all sorts of different options here, and I was just trying to figure out, okay, is there some sort of something that, not that we're missing, but that we're maybe not seeing in advance that they're thinking about already, and that's what I came up with. I'm not saying I'm right. I'm not saying they would be crazy for holding on to him. Of course, there is merit to that. It was just something that struck me as, hey, you know what? I'd rather talk about this on the radio than come out and say, yeah, I was thinking about this 2 months ago and I never said it.
No, that totally makes sense. And I think this group, I don't want to say this organization, I mean, it's currently the organization, but like the Rivera group has adopted a very different approach compared to like the Carson Wentz decision, right? Wentz, it was like, we are going hard and we are going to win right now. Like the negotiation, or that was actually them losing the negotiation, but we don't need to rehash that right now. But like they were very decisive. And I think what they might have learned from that, or just a lot of these situations are different too. Like, let's be real about that. Not every decision that gets made around a player is the exact same. I think what they've done is with Chase, like they were waiting until the last second. With a lot of these decisions outside of Payne, where the ability to sign him, let them do other things, they are willing to let things play out as opposed to make decisions just for the sake of making them. Which I actually respect that a lot, because so often I feel like organizations kind of succumb to outside pressure, but. And sure, there are benefits occasionally of being decisive about certain things that allows you flexibility to do other things. But I'm actually impressed with their willingness to kind of walk some tightropes and play some things out and not make decisions before they have to this particular offseason.
Again, I agree with you. I mean, there's a lot of different ways you can do this. Now, the one thing I will point out is if you play that game, right, and say Kendall has, the kind of year he had last year, which was good at times, and I think some of that grading obviously, goes up because of the enormity of some of those plays. Again, mentioned, the couple of pick sixes and, the pick at the end of the Atlanta game. And he had more than that. I'm not saying that was the season in a nutshell, but you know what I'm talking about. I think there's a possible advantage to waiting and being patient and not trading away an asset if you're not going to pick up another asset in return and you're trying to do it for salary cap space and or a rollover salary cap space type situation. So I get it. I understand it. I guess the one way I would just go with this, Craig, is well, let me ask you this, if we have a second,
sure,
because you're smarter about this than certainly I.
You're going to make me blush, don't you even?
Can you play, in your opinion, Emmanuel Forbes, Kendall Fuller, and Benjamin St-Juste at the same time, and maybe even a fourth corner, or depending on how they align, Buffalo nickel, 3 safeties and 3 corners? Can you play them because teams are lining up in a lot of 3-by-1 sets with, yes, a traditional slot, but also 3 traditional bigger-bodied wide receivers, meaning outside receivers,
right,
even though 1 or 2 of them are on the inside? I think you can do that. Therefore, I think you can get Fuller, St-Juste, and Forbes on the field more than maybe originally we were thinking. Is that fair?
I think it's totally fair, and it just depends on a very simple question. Like, is whoever's going to wind up moving inside in that particular alignment better than Danny Johnson, better than Quan Martin for whatever specific purpose, better than whoever else they might be trotting out there to play nickel, Cam Dantzler, whoever they think could potentially be in that spot? If Fuller's the better option or St-Juste is the better option, then yeah, like trying it out, there's nothing wrong with that. Like, they're all on your roster right now. I think the other realistic thing here, Chris, is like St-Juste's health has been such a concern that I'm not looking to prematurely send out Kendall Fuller when on the second day of camp, any one of these 3 guys could go down. And that's just the nature of the game. And so that's actually why, like, it's hypothetical trades 4 months ahead of time, like, hooray our industry, hooray sports talk radio. But the idea of like, hey, maybe that's the play here. Like, here's another option you may not have thought about. I actually liked that thought from you, and why I wanted to have you want to talk it out and talk it through. Because if all of a sudden you arrive healthy at the end of camp and you have some of these young guys step up that give you options where you're comfortable trading Fuller and someone else wants him, like, yeah, at that point, it makes a lot of sense. But to do it prematurely, same thing with Logan Thomas, same thing with some of these other guys. Chase Rudy is in a different bucket because he's coming back from injury, and everyone who ever says anything about Chase is like, great dude, great signing at the time. He might be done. And so, like, he's in a different bucket. But the rest of these guys, everyone's in such a rush to move on. And I don't necessarily think that's the wisest thing, because why move on when you don't need to? They don't need the cap space right now. And finally, the Lamar Jackson card's not on the table anymore for people that want to make that. But, like, they don't need the cap space. So why are you in a rush to create it?
Well, again, I think, just circling back here, obviously Rouillet and even Andrew Norwell are completely different situations than Fuller. So, in general, I absolutely agree with what you just laid out. I would also say this, that, it depends on who, if anybody's out there in now the next tier post-draft of free agency that you want to go and sign, number one. Because, remember, they've signed Trey Turner, Bobby McCain, and Charles Leno the last 2 years after the draft, right? So they've been active during this period, number one. Now, again, I am not calling for Kendall Fuller to be cut now or even post-June 1st before camp. I was just merely saying, hey, if those guys perform really well or up to expectations, maybe this is something you consider to save $8+ million so that you can, again, potentially reinvest it either then or maybe at the trade deadline when you don't have a lot of cap space right now. Now, that being said, the one fear that I have, and I don't know if I expanded upon it enough, is you remember what happened at the beginning of last year, right? They had, 6 corners, and all of a sudden they cut Danny Johnson and Cornelder, who, oh, by the way, had a pretty good camp, a pretty good preseason, and then they were like 4 live corners, and then all of a sudden they looked around and said, oh, crap, we need corners, right. And they signed like Rashad Wild Goose, who stinks, Tariq Castro.
Who's better by the end of the year? You be nice to Rashad
right.
Wild Goose.
Okay, all right, but all of a sudden they didn't have corners, so that when Kendall Fuller was struggling, which he was miserably early on in the year, when Cam Curl was banged up, they didn't have, and I know that's a different position, but they didn't have the bodies necessarily to make all the chess pieces move. So my fear in moving on from Fuller, even though there would be a significant cap savings and maybe more push for these guys to play, my fear would be, oh my God, what do you do if Benjamin St-Juste again goes down, which he's done? What do you do if, Emmanuel Forbes gets hurt? Now you're screwed. And I understand this is the game that teams all have to play. And again, I'm not saying I have all the answers. I just throw it out there as a think piece, as a think topic. Like, what would you do if you were the GM? Because I do think it's an intriguing decision, at least in my eyes.
Think we did. Excellent work by you. And Anthony, he tricked us into thinking. But you know what we did, Anthony? Anthony's not paying attention.
Anthony's dancing.
No, he actually was not. He was. What were you reading, Anthony? You were very intent.
I was pulling sound.
Oh, okay. That's legitimate because we have our sound segment to end the show. You know what we did? We did, Anthony, though? We tricked Chris Russell. He thought he was done working for the week because he's out tomorrow. We got our money's worth. Bosses, you're welcome. We got your money's worth out of Chris Russell with an extra segment.
Thanks for having me, pal. I hope I made sense. I don't know if I did, but I hope I made sense.
I don't know either. I wasn't paying attention. I'll see you next week. Have a great weekend. All right, it's Chris Russell, everybody, with us on the Team 980. Of course, catch his show 1 to 4 each and every day before ours. When we get back, Game 2 tonight, Lakers-Warriors. We preview it before we get to real things, real people said in real microphones, which Anthony is very hard at work on.
This is the Hoffman Show on the Team 980 and the Odyssey app.